So, pardon. Okay, good morning, everybody. I'm very happy to host this event here at Fondazione Bonotto. And first of all, I thank all those present for having welcomed this event with such enthusiasm. In particular, the staff of the Activating Fluxus program, who have proposed to host this important appointment here at Fondazione Bonotto. I also thank the connected people who I hope I will find that their works interesting. Now, we will see a little short welcome video by Luigi Bonotto, and you will find also a short text by him in your chat. So, enjoy the video.
Buongiorno, grazie per essere qui presenti e aver scelto come sede la Fondazione per il vostro convegno. Mi dispiace immensamente e credetemi, non posso essere con voi perché la mia salute in questo momento è quella che è. Ho lasciato in ogni caso uno scritto dove espongo qualche mia idea in merito al vostro convegno, al vostro pensiero. Un caro saluto a tutti, buon lavoro e spero rincontrarvi una prossima volta da qualche parte.
So thank you, Luigi. And now I leave the word to Hanna Hölling that introduce the day work.
Hello, welcome everyone. Can you hear me well?
Yes, yes.
Okay, my name is Hanna Hölling, and I work as research professor at Bern University of Applied Science Academy of the Arts, HKB, and I am really delighted to welcome everyone to this event, Activating Fluxus in and out of the archive, which is the public part of our inaugural Fluxus Study Day. In this incredibly rich collection and in the stunning landscape of Molvena. I am welcoming our hosts, our speakers, guests, and those of you watching us from online all around the world. And I am really pleased to extend a warm welcome on behalf of my colleagues and the core members of the project, Aga Wielocha, Josephine Ellis, ComCom members, Markus Gossold and Johannes Hedinger, as well as our associated members, the researchers Elke Grün, Sally Kawamura, Emily Parendot, and Stephanie Mante. It is a pleasure to have almost all of them here with us today. This fantastic team has come together thanks to a generous support of the Swiss National Science Foundation and at Bern University of Applied Sciences, Academy of the Arts, and we are thrilled to be hosted by the Fondazione, as Patrizio already mentioned, and would like to express our sincere gratitude to its founder and president, Mr. Luigi Bonotto, whom we just heard, and the director, Patrizio Pertelini, and secretary, Enrica Sampon, for their role in making this event possible. Our project, Activating Fluxus, explores the lives and afterlives of Fluxus objects, events, and ephemera created in the 1960s, 70s in Switzerland, Europe, the UK, and the US. Fluxus, as you all know, transformed creative practice for good, not least by questioning the dominant preconceptions of the artwork as something that endures unchanged. Inherently fluctuating by definition, the creative outputs of Fluxus reject any stable material form. While many histories of the post-avant-garde focus on the implication of nascent conceptualism and performativity for other artistic genres, our project considers the fundamentally transitory aspect of Fluxus forms not destined for preservation. By seeking new ways to engage with the legacy of Fluxus through the lens of conservation, art history, performance studies, heritage studies, and museology, this project examines the possibility of activating Fluxus, challenged by, as it is, by its paradoxical coexistence of ephemerality and materiality, with implications for how we conceive of changeable artworks that emerged after the 1960s. So we could have not asked for a more fitting and exciting location to hold our first Fluxus study day than here at Fondazione Bonotto. The foundation remains a significant point of reference for the archiving and collecting of Fluxus. Having taken its name from the Latin word meaning flow, as you all know, Fluxus fluctuated across a dense international network of artists in the 1960s and 70s. Indicating a state of mind rather than an art movement, Fluxus is inherently difficult to define. Moreover, the creative outputs of Fluxus reject any stable material form. As something transitory, ephemeral or imagined, at times based on foodstuff, organic debris, actions, or three-dimensional notation, Fluxus artworks continue to complicate the concept of timelessness art, of timeless art that is supposedly created to last forever. The identities of Fluxus artworks thus cannot be attributed to any one physical manifestation, but materialize processually through various forms and relations. Caring for the legacy of Fluxus not only requires accepting change as integral to the ongoing life of Fluxus artworks, but also as a positive value, an invitation to creatively engage with the porosity of a living artwork's boundaries. As a result, while historical iterations of Fluxus works from the 1960s and 70s can be safeguarded as important documents to the recent past, our project aims to explore different modalities of engaging with Fluxus spirit beyond the questions of physical preservation and towards the more imaginative horizon of activation. And you will hear more on this notion from my colleagues, Wielocha and also Ellis later today, but just to briefly mention that the notion of activation really offers us an opportunity to expand the established approaches for conserving changeable artworks that have emerged since the 1960s, and activation, as we loosely conceive it, suggests methods such as reconstruction, adaptation, and artistic reinterpretation of Fluxus forms. So through this proposition to activate and not just to preserve Fluxus, the notion of the archive sheds its traditional function as historical repository that contextualizes works of art, and instead it is foregrounded as an integral kind of entity to Fluxus artworks comprised of artistic materials that can transform what the meaning of artwork is and might potentially be. We are thus immensely excited that this panel brings together eminent figures in the fields of archiving and collecting Fluxus materials to critically discuss activation as a mode of continuing and caring for the Fluxus legacy. And I will briefly mention them in alphabetical order. It's Elke Allgeier, who's here with us from the Staatsgalerie Stuttgart and Archiv Somme. It's Lionel Bouvier, who is also here with us from the MAMCO and Elkhart Archives in Genève. And it's also Elke Grün from Nassauische Kunstverein Wiesbaden. It's Laura Montanari and Alessandro Gazzotti from Pari and Dispari Archivio from Reggio Emilia, and they will be joining us today online. Very excited. It's Patrizio Pertelini, who just welcomed you from the director of Fondazione Bonotto and our host from this organization. It's also Hubertus von Amelunxen, whom I warmly welcome. And he's from Archivio, he represents Archivio Cons in Berlin. And obviously our project team, Wielocha and Josephine Ellis of the University of Applied Sciences Academy of the Arts. So I'm really very, very excited to have you all here and to be conversing with you later today. Just a few words really of housekeeping before we begin. The organization of the day foresees that there are two sessions. So the first session happens just now, and later on there will be an afternoon session, each divided, each kind of curated into individual set of presentations. And we'll have a lunch break between 12:30 and 14 hours. The panel discussion will allow the speakers to interact with each other and with the audience, and it is planned for later today. If you have any questions, this is directed to our dear guests here and the speakers. but also to everyone who's listening to us online. Please just type them into the chat, and we'll try to convey them then verbally to the speakers. Exactly. So our guest here, Morvena, is to raise a hand and speak up. There will be also additional opportunities again to ask questions in the panel that is happening as a final discussion later today. In an interest of time, we will not be introducing the speakers with full biographies and will not be reading the abstracts of their papers, and we refer you to the documents beautifully put together by my colleagues and accessible online. Perhaps you could also paste it into the chat. Thank you so much, Aga. And finally, I would like to remind everyone that this event is being recorded, and we are hoping to make it available online for those of you who are unable to stay with us the whole day today. But other than this, I'm really excited, and I'm welcoming again Patrizio Peterlini. It is my huge pleasure to introduce you as the first speaker, and you will offer us insights into the creation of Dick Higgins Intermedia charts and its many activations and related stories. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. Here I am again. So I therefore had the task of opening the meeting and recalling the basic question of the whole day: how to transform an archive into a living place, not only for research but also for production. So I shared the this one. Okay, we are ready. Here we are. So, how to transform an archive into a living place? This is the crucial question that has guided everything I have tried to do here at Fondazione Bonotto, and which I will now briefly illustrate. Let's start with the cataloging, which is somewhat the basis of all the rest of the work. Cataloging all this material stored here, following the intuition of Luigi Bonotto, who strongly wanted in full Fluxus spirit of democratization of art, that his collection was freely available, was not simple undertaking. First of all, because as you well know, these materials, yes, is that? Why not? Pardon, is not sharing. Why not? Oh, pardon, beg your pardon. I forget to share the screen. So here we are. Okay. As I say, the first color of you can see now better. Okay. First of all, because as we well known, these materials are difficult to ascribe to a specific category. They are objects that falls between the media, the intermedia, in fact. But above all, because I asked myself the problem of how to make the whole operation interesting. This is to say, not presenting a classical academic filing, almost impossible, I just mentioned it, but building a tool that is interesting for scholars, but especially that intrigues me. The goal was therefore immediately to remove the dust from the archive and make it attractive, transform storage from static to active. This explains why the records are very simple, with the basic data for the description of the object, and also because we have tried in every way to create links between the different records so that browsing is more interesting and curious. I think we have partly succeeded. The project to turn browsing into a real, funny online game, well, that for the moment is still in progress. Obviously, however, this is not enough. We need to bring something more into play. And this something more is, indeed, it must be some new creative energy. Just as most Fluxus works and experimental poetry require the participation of the public, with its calling to actively interact with them, so the archive must follow the same spirit too. So, right from the start, I thought of an interaction project in which I asked the young artists or young curators to actively engage with the archive and not just come for a visit. The first program in this direction was the collaboration with the Atelier Fondazione Bevilacqua, La Masa in Venice, which envisaged a workshop for young artists at the Fondazione Bonotto, aimed at developing an exhibition project. Thus was born the first major exhibition of Fondazione Bonotto, Flux books from the 60s to the future, Fluxus artist books in and from the Luigi Bonotto collection. The idea of continuity with respect to the Fluxus experiences is already clear in the title. That is to say, don't consider them finished in the 60s or 70s, but still alive, interesting, stimulating, and influential in the beginning of the new millennium. How did the collaboration develop? I proposed working on artist books, and I select a series of books from the Bonotto collection and made them available to the young artists in residence in Venice, asking them to choose one and develop a work in dialogue, response, evolution, consequence of the chosen book. I didn't ask them to make a new artist book, but respecting their own poetics, create a new work. The result was amazing. You can see our photo here. Apart from the initial embarrassment, because young artists have discovered that many of what they believe to be their innovative ideas had already been developed by other artists 40 years ago. Nice narcissist smack. But precisely because of this initial shock and the profound crisis that followed, oh my God, what I can do now, everything has been done. The work proved to be extremely interesting, and the final result was surprising. The following year, therefore, it was decided to renew the experience, and fruit of the second year was rolled up. In this case, the idea proposed by the artists themselves was to create a collective edition, an assembling, relaunching a very widespread practices in the 60s and 70s. The result was a series of works, each in 35 copies, collected in a precious editions, an object book made on fabric, in which each artist is left with the task of inhabiting the space of a pocket with their work. 35 copies because the atelier program was reserved for artists with a maximum age of 35. The rule, because ideally represent Luigi, the weaver, who embraces, protects the artists. Another interesting experience in this direction was the collaboration with the School of Curatorial Studies in Venice. Also, in this case, the initiative, the invitation to visit the foundation and its archives triggered a work that resulted in the exhibition Symphony of Anger, the Fifth Movement. Taking into consideration the themes of desire, taste, digestion, and waste, the project was developed as an experimental curator model in which the organic exploration of body hunger is connected on a socio-political and aesthetic investigation. The project had the precise intention of relaunching the Fluxus spirit through a convergence in the contemporary world. The young curators have thus involved contemporary artists inspired by the same hunger to express social, cultural, and political issues through the physicality and interaction with their works, who have been exhibited together with works from the Bonotto collection. Other interesting exercise and experience have been those developed with the London-based artist Jess Darling, with the dancer Andrea Costanzo Martini, who built a show by elaborating his experience of visiting and studying the Bonotto collection. Or again with Anna Maria Aimone and Cane di Coda, who entered in dialogue with the Fondazione Bonotto, and they studied the Fluxus and concrete visual and sound poetry collection through an empathic approach. The two artists listened to the entire repertoire and made a selection and a thematic division. The choice and the subsequent sound were worked by Cane di Coda, fell on the pieces that allowed for greater dialogue and coexistence between live music and operation on movement. The final result was Sliding Bee, a long performance, 3 uninterrupted hours, in which Anna Maria Aimone danced on the sound carpet created by the Cane di Coda. Another vein is instead invested electronic music, with the production of some new pieces by Emmeline Ducot, who has transformed the texture of the fabrics produced here in Bonotto into real scores. One of the pieces was then used as the soundtrack of Bonotto Virtual Tour. You can listen to on our website. Then there was the project developed by L'Impero della Luce, composed by the duo Joan Merich and Eriak, which transformed the magnetic fields of the works and the machinery that coexist in Bonotto into music. You can find the result at that link you can see in the page, and this other. Another issue related to this problem of making archives alive is related to the immaterial aspect of many of the documents preserved in them. In particular, for example, as far as we are concerned, and to continue on the musical trend, the audio archives. How to organize an exhibition based on audio. How to make the nothing to be seen attractive. This was the challenge behind the project La Voix Libérée, Poésie Sonore, that I curated at the Palais de Tokyo in 2019 with Eric Manjon. This installation we developed tackled the issue in a radical way. An empty black dark room where one was immersed in a continuous flow of sound. As an entrance, a long wall with the chronology of the development of sound poetry with an extremely scenographic impact created by the graphic artist Annette Lenz. Surprisingly, despite my concerns and the management of the Palais de Tokyo, the experiment was extremely successful. Many visits, especially from young people. Many of them also downloaded the catalog in the form of an app developed for the occasion. But I would now like to talk about the last two projects, one already completed and the other in progress. For the first was hummingbirds and hamburgers, on which we collaborated with the University of Reading, UK, and the University of Limerick, in Ireland, involving artist and researcher Christine Ellison, Erato Zavara, and Nicholas Ward. For this residency, in collaboration with the Bonotto Foundation and Opera Estate Festival, Vasilis Travaras, Mario Pisiu, and Fer Gonzalez Morales, and the director Robbie McCain joined together collaboration with local students and graduates. Starting from the study of Fluxus scores, their objectivity, the language used, the ambiguity of the indications, the project aimed to develop a new form of score with a critical involvement of the most common and used graphical interfaces through the performance. The process was extremely interesting and challenging, and I believe that a short passage of the short video they made, it's not really short, but the video they made can explain it better than my words. So now I show you. Okay. The short video.
So you have a box of instructions, yeah?
Yeah.
And how we open up the box defines how we will experience it.
You have to enjoy, you have to take it, play it as you like, find your way to use it, to renew the scores, to make it alive, are not something dead in a little box.
There are different ways of reading the score. So it is a score, but then it's how you enter the score with your body.
You consider that the body is a starting point of understanding and perceiving and materializing. The body that perceives and acts is the one that actually creates the surrounding.
If people move in a certain way in a particular space, then that space becomes something in relation to that movement.
How do we prompt the body?
once you start to think about the idea of a score as something open, a simple instruction, a simple word, an object, an interaction, an invitation.
It's quite expansive. So you can choose to interpret or activate a score in a literal way. I think it also invites you to rethink what is the instruction.
You can find the video in the page of Christian Ellison, the Something is Happening project here in Modena, that explains very well as they interact with the Fluxus core to renew it using the visuality, the visual of the interfaces of the internet interface. Okay, just a moment. Okay. And the result was the performance, dance performance, where the young artists become themselves a sort of scroll bar or space bar, arrows, etc. At the end of the experience, Christine Ellison donated a series of new scores elaborated during the workshop to the Bonotto Foundation, collected in an envelope in full Fluxus tradition. And now, the current project concerns the Intermedia chart. The famous diagram was created by Dick Higgins here in Modena to explain the concept of Intermedia to his friend Luigi. Higgins did not speak Italian, and Luigi does not speak English. From communication difficulties, this graphic organization was born, published several times both by Higgins and by many other artists and curators in number of books, catalogs, etc. Not only referring to Fluxus. In fact, the diagram can well explain much of the art of the 20th century from the avant-garde onwards. Following what Higgins wrote on the concept of Intermedia, the concept itself cannot be thought of in a static way. Since Intermedia is always in progress, I thought that maybe it was time to update the diagram and ask the artists we are in contact with to do this work. I must say that they have all responded enthusiastically, and so far we have collected about 20 or so of these updates. Most have approached the Intermedia chart almost reverentially. The interventions are minimal and tend to fill the circles left empty by Dick Higgins in 1995, or add a few more circles with the new forms of art and poetry. Others, on the other hand, have used the optical scheme as the basis for the development of an exclusively visual work. All these updates will flow into an edition scheduled for 2025, 30th anniversary of the creation of the Intermedia diagram, and 60th anniversary of the first text on Intermedia wrote by Dick Higgins. And the edition will be also enriched by theoretical contributions. For me, this is the highest example of how a simple archive object becomes a stimulus for a new production, relaunching the poetics developed between the 16th and 17th toward the future. In particular, this diagram stimulates theoretical reflections, both on what was happening so far in the art world and on the possible direction it could take tomorrow. This is why, for us here at the Bonotto Foundation, this diagram represents the Ursa Maggiore, which marks our path, as Lamberto Pignotti realized in his updating. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Patrizio. That was really hugely insightful. Can one hear me well? As well through the mics? Yes. It was very insightful. And now we welcome questions. If someone has already question to Patrizio, also please put the questions into the chat if you are interested in further aspects of his work and the work of, excuse me, of Fondazione Bonotto. But if you have no immediate questions, I would love to start with the first one. Patrizio, do you consider these are amazing? Especially, I'm very interested in the Intermedia chart as an archive in its own right, how it accumulates, the updates of different artists and how it, in a way, becomes, not only an archive but perhaps an expanded notion of an artwork. Could you say a few words perhaps in this direction? Is it for you, a sort of an archival work, or is it a continuation of what Dick Higgins started? What also interests me greatly is whether Higgins himself perhaps had the chance to respond to these new actualizations of his diagram.
Well, for me, the diagram is something, it's an object on the border. Is artworks as well as a theoretical diagram. So it's a perfect intermediate object. Is on the border, is something to be used in a active way, interacting with it. So for that, we ask to all the artists to play with it. Play with it. And the interesting thing is that the young artists involved are very, very, very stimulated by this diagram. They well known, the diagram is very well known, very published, but in some way to interact with it, stimulate themselves to ask what I'm doing, what we'll do in the future, where is my direction, what I'm doing. And so this is become a sort of hard task I ask for them, because some of them don't answer, or they take long time to reflect on that and to act something on this diagram. And this is very interesting, I think, because it's not something, as I say, the video, unfortunately, not simple. It's not dead. It's not something closed, finished, but it's something that continues to be alive, as Luigi Bonotto wrote in his little text. These things have to be alive still. So this is the first. Dickens, I don't know. I think it will be very interesting in that. So, I never met him, and I have not a chance to meet him. But when I read the text of him, especially the text on Intermedia, what I feel is a sort of invitation. So this is not the truth. I propose Intermedia as a concept, but we can work on it. So also the Intermedia is not something closed, it's something in progress. So all the form of art can be enter Intermedia and go out from Intermedia. So it's something moving. And I think that it will be happy to know that young artists or other artists interact with this concept.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Sally, yes. Sally Capello.
I was really interested about how some of the young artists incorporated the fabric from the Bonotto factory into their work. And I was wondering about the electronic music by Amélie Ducot. And I just wondered about how those fabric scores were interpreted, whether there was some instructions to go with the piece or whether it was free interpretation.
The Amélie Ducot project consists in scanning the textiles, the different kind of textile you saw yesterday, we visited so many, and they scan not only the fiber, also the area, the color, the different kind, the space between the two, if it is a hole or not, it is all the difference was scanning and transformed in a sort of source for producing music. So scanning the textile, produce music. This is the idea. So they produce they elaborated the program to do that, and each difference was connected to a sound that come from the collection. So a piece of La Montagnana artwork or a piece of sound poetry, okay? This each change can call the piece of music, and the piece of music was elaborated then by the computer to transform it in something electronic. So it's a little bit complex, but the result was amazing. You can listen to it. We publish also, she published also a record with the result. It's a very interesting project because mixing the two reality of Bonotto, all the archive, the Fondazione Bonotto, so all the artwork, the art world, okay, and the textile world. So the two mixing in this idea of weaving, you know, where the yarn become a red yarn between the two.
That's absolutely fascinating. Thank you.
We have a comment in the chat from Marcus Gossard, who actually was here yesterday and has to leave us, unfortunately, for health reasons. But he's writing, in the word chart, art is inherent in the word chart, right? Chart art, which is interesting. Any other questions? Yes, please, Emily.
Patrizio, I come back to the project of inviting artists to intervene on the diagram, Higgins diagram. Can you tell us if all the artists you invited add some elements on the diagram, or did some of them erase some things or reorganize things in the diagram? And my next question is not a question, but is activation always adding something? It's not a question for you, just...
Yeah, I understand. Yes, both. Some of them just put some new media or some new direction on the art where there is the question mark in the original one, or the empty one. Other change some of the circle, raising it and making it something a little bit different. I don't remember now all the stuff, but so it was really interact with not only as visual but also conceptually. Some of them use the map, the diagram, to as a sort of overview. Also, it was homework. So it put, as we see in the Takako Saito, for example, the performances of the object, the artwork he developed during his life, her life, in some hours between the circles. So it's a sort of interpretation of his own work. Or others, they don't take care of all these aspects and just transform it in a simple visual path, like Clemente Padin, for instance, transform it just in with stars and colors, and transform it just in an abstract work. So this is interesting because everyone approaching in a different way, and I think it is important to respect that, because as I did with the other project, we don't ask to make a new one or to stay in the same materiality, but respect his own poetics and interact with the object proposed.
Thank you. Yes, Aga Wielocha.
So I have just so many questions. I mean, this is a fascinating project, Patrizio. I love it, and I'm just kind of curious. So, how the Intermedia chart actually entered the collection first? As what? What was that? I mean, physically, materially. Yeah. I'm curious.
As I explained, the Intermedia was the result of a chat, of an impossible chat between Ellis and Luigi Bonotto. The one don't speak English, the other don't speak Italian, so it was impossible to chat. So to explain Intermedia during a dinner, as Fluxus always happen, during the dinner, after the dinner, it began to make some circle of the napkin, or paper napkins. Maybe starting, this is the souvenir of Luigi and the sons who was present, starting from the mark of the glass left on the napkins. So this was the first circle, maybe, or the bottle that left the circle, and then chatting, he began to design this circle, the little one more, to explain. At the end, the napkins was the diagram chart. And the kid is, it's not so bad. The result of this impossible result is not so bad. So you take the napkins, put in the pocket, and the day after, asked Luigi to use a computer. And he began to work on this draft on computer, and the result was the first Intermedia chart that unfortunately is lost. The original one is lost. Because,
like the digital version.
Yeah, yeah. Also the napkins, because leaking is saved. But because immediately the two realized that the diagram is very important, very useful. So they decided to make an edition immediately. So the diagram, the original one, was sent for the translation and for the reassembly for a print form. This was the one we have here. And so they lost it. But the additional 2 was unfortunately unfinished due to the death of the Kiggins the same year, 95.
Right.
So this was a strange history, but we have here all the project in the Fondazione. We have a photocopy of the original map, of the original diagram. The first one realized a computer, not the original, but a photocopy, and all the letters, typewriting, also handwriting by the Kiggins about how to the design of the diagram and also the explication of the diagram. So we have all the documentation about that. So this is how the diagram born.
All right. And the extra, so just one more question, sorry.
Yeah.
So, and how the interventions or the updates of the diagram are entering to the collection. So,
yeah, when I decided to make this project, I talked with Luigi, yes, it's important to do it. And so we reprint the diagram in another format, not 70 for 100, but the contrary, 100 for 70. Okay, it was not horizontal but vertical. And we put the date and the on the corner, on the right corner. And where it was done. So Molvena, if I well remember, it's February or January 95. So we print it in this format on cardboard, and we send it a copy to all the artists we are in contact with.
all right.
Okay, involving them to renew the diagram.
Okay.
So not all, we are step by step, we decide to send to all, but we decide also to make to divide in section the work.
Right, great project.
We start 10, we divide the work in 10 copies. And so we send it to be the first, we receive the second. When we receive the first, we send the second to the other group of artists and so on. So this is what happened.
All right. So that was kind of like the prompt was from the foundation. Okay.
Yeah.
That's super interesting.
Yeah, I can show you if you want the result. If you have someone, I can show you if you want.
Thank you so much. I would like to give voice to Amelunxen.
I just have one question, because the original chart and diagram from the Higgins Intermedia is from the 60s. It's 1966.
Yeah.
So no. I mean, he made a diagram. I have it. It's published in something else press. But this is one thing. So it's a long time ago. But the second question is now more important: is how do you explain that? I mean, in this time when he first did this, which is the 60s. The computer software, they were like radical software, so the media, the electronic media came up. How do you explain for you that they are not part of this journey?
Yeah.
I mean, you had journals, underground journals, and public journals, which are radical softwares. You had Amelunxen being there.
Yes.
So it's for me it's a surprise.
Yes, for me too. But I know that it was not so involved in the
media.
No, not in media, in electronic media. Yeah. So maybe he's not interested in that. I don't know why he don't put we have to ask him thinking maybe. About the diagram talk, in fact, there is 3 diagrams by the Higgins, but the first was published in the 60s, but were different. You can find that we have different kinds. There is 3 different intermediate charts. At the beginning is intermediate poetry chart, form of a star, a sort of a star.
Yes.
So it was an evolution of the diagram. And the last one was this.
But then there was one, if I may.
Just very briefly, because we are already running.
Question. Because if you have it at that time, and if you relate this to George Maciunas, who had was actually obsessed by diagrams.
Yeah.
And but Maciunas always went with the diagrams into history. So, and funny enough, for Higgins, there's no history. So it's the moment, it's 66, it's then later in 95 or something. Is this related to Fluxus not being historical or being transcendental or whatever?
I think there are two different approaches. The Maciunas diagram want to create a sort of history of Fluxus himself. Insert the Fluxus history into the development of art history. So he developed a sort of diagram, historical diagram, to have a parents, noble parents for Fluxus, from futurism, etc. So he developed this sort of diagram in a historical way. Dickens has a completely different approach. Is a diagram, all the three diagrams, as an explanation of a concept. So it's a different approach. Also the objective is different. For Dickens, is something that is useful to explain a concept, and the visuality help to understand what is Intermedia. Maciunas is working just to historicize the movement, just to have model parents, etc.
And we have to, unfortunately, we have to really move forward. Would you like to correct
just one thing just to comment is that I invite you to keep high on a diagram by Maciunas from '62, which is not an historical diagram, but really a kind of pre-intermediate chart. So just to notice that this diagram from Maciunas may be very interesting to cross with that one.
Yes, that's a great.
Which one?
I can show you. It was in 1962, in June 1962, when the manifesto was first time done by talk by Artus Caspari, and on his back there is a Maciunas diagram showing how out of that time were between time and space and everything.
I understand which one is published also in the book.
Just to say that this one could be very interesting to compare to
And I think obviously in a statement of Intermedia, which dates back to 1962, right, is something also an interesting reference point for this. But thank you so much, Patrizio, again. Thank you so much for everyone's questions. I'd like to welcome our next speakers. Let me just find the proper page here. This will be my colleagues, Wielocha and Josie Ellis. The second presentation of today it will be a joint presentation by Wielocha and Josephine Ellis, who are postdoctoral fellow and doctoral candidate respectively in the project Activating Fluxus, and who will share elements of their research to elucidate the notion of archival activation.
Does you start?
Okay. You have to share the.
Hi everyone, thank you Patrizio and Hanna. So in this presentation Aga and I will be thinking through the notion of activation and its relationship to the archive, both in terms of how archives might activate us and how we might activate the archive. So this presentation will be split into two segments that reflects these dual layers of activation. The first is a walkthrough of my encounter with a work by Milan Knizak through the digital collection of the ZOM archives and some of the affective twists and turns that emerge when engaging with the generative ambiguity of Fluxus remains. And I'd like to mention quickly that Elke Algeier, the curator of the ZOM archives, will be giving a presentation on the evolution of the archives later this afternoon, which we are very much looking forward to. And in the second part of this presentation, Aga will consider the mechanisms through which Fluxus artworks can be activated and speculate about the ways in which they might subsist and endure within archives, and also introduce her idea of an activation toolkit. Okay, so let us begin somewhere in the collection of the ZOM archives. There are 14 paper gliders and one made of aluminium foil mounted behind glass in a black wooden box. And the gliders are attributed to Milan Knizak, an artist from the former Czechoslovakia who participated in the transnational Fluxus network through correspondence, collaboration, and at times conflict with Fluxus artists in the West. Some gliders bear the traces of handwritten instructions, and on others they are typewritten. From what I can see, they are written in Czech. I have attempted to make translations of the gliders from this image using Google Translate, and if anyone was curious as to what that looks like without typing in the words manually yourself, it's this. But eventually I ended up with two somewhat legible translations. If anyone can speak Czech and is thinking those are totally wrong, then please do get in touch. But the first one seems to be a recollection, which reads, I made a lot of patriotic paper cards for several friends, and on March 10th, 1965, they gave them away to the corrupt vagrants. Another one seems to be an instruction, similar in form, but not completely the same as a Fluxus event score, lacking a title and date in this glider iteration, but it would later become Walking Event, which can be found in the Fluxus Performance Workbook and is dated to 1965. On a busy city avenue, draw a circle about 3 meters in diameter with chalk on the sidewalk. Walk around the circle as long as possible without stopping. A description accompanying this digitized image online suggests that it was probably Hans Zom, whose collection forms the substance of the ZOM archives, that had formulated the gliders into this composition, and that Zom had left a note stuck onto the back of a box, part of which reads, They were let fly from a tower in Prague in November 14, 1965. This note makes me wonder about the lives that these gliders have lived. Although vague, this note seems to make explicit what might have been implicit in the peculiar physicality of all of these gliders all along, that they once had an active life beyond the confines of the black wooden box that they are kept in today. In the accessible boxes of the ZOM archives, there is a brown package with photographs of the events Zom speaks of, the flying of the gliders from the tower in Prague. I could not take photos of them, but there are very similar photos on MoMA's website as part of a large collection of documents called Performance Files, put together in the 1980s by Knizak for John Hendricks, curator of the Gilbert and Lila Silverman Fluxus collection. Enclosed in Performance File 23, called Make a Big Paper Glider, are photographic traces of a crowd gathered around Petrin Lookout Tower in Prague, folding paper into planes and playing in the snow. They had been invited there 2 weeks before Knizak, asking them to come with big paper gliders. With this apparent sliver of clarity about the history of the gliders in the ZOM archives quickly folds back into uncertainty. Were these very same gliders actually present in this scene that the Performance File 23 photographs so vividly document, as Zom's note suggested? The crowd looks to be engaged in plain paper glider making, an activation of Knijak's instruction to make a big paper glider, whereas those in the Zom archive suggested or recorded a variety of different actions to be carried out, inscribed on the gliders themselves. Of course, these photographs only offer a partial perspective to the past, and our access has been entirely dictated by the spontaneous decisions of the cameraman at the time. But I just can't seem to reconcile with some suggestion that, in the case of these very paper gliders, in a black wooden box, that they were let fly from a tower in Prague. Or perhaps by they, Zom wasn't referring to these specific gliders, but about some of Knijak's gliders more generally. So how would we, or are we, to engage with these gliders? If they were not thrown from a tower in Prague, would we throw them, or carry out the instructions on the gliders, or both? And how would we classify these gliders in the Zom archives? Are they prompts for actions, remains of actions, or even actions in themselves? And how would we evaluate them, as individual gliders or collectively? And as is the case of leftover Fluxus event scores, what are we to make of their artistic status? Are they works of art at all, simultaneously designed by the artist's hand and yet intended to delegate authorship to unforeseen participants, or are they merely artifactual, part of history's documentary records? As is the case with many Fluxus remains, perhaps we are looking at something in between action and inaction, object and event, artwork and artifact, a possibility or potential, as Hanna Hölling and Natalie Herren have argued. Drawing upon the similarities between philosophers Henry Bergson and Gilles Deleuze, and Fluxus artistic Higgins's exemplar to this manifesto, Hölling suggests that the unlimited potentialities of an artwork reside in the inexhaustibility of the concept. The same concept can materialize in space and time differently. No one materialization constitutes the concept in final form, but are exemplifications of the concept's potential. Important here, as both Hölling and Herren note, is the distinction between what is possible and what is potential. While the possible implies a predetermined and fixed set of materializations, the notion of potentiality is more radical, allowing for, to paraphrase Herren, unexpected divergences from the known, and not to quote Herren, the potential for ushering forth the utterly new. What potential then inheres in Knijak's gliders? So it's not my intention to answer this question definitively, nor any of the above cascade of questions, but to open up another more general question about how Fluxus things in the archives lure us in and call on us even, and how we might respond. And what I've hoped to show in these reflections of my encounter with a digital image of Knijak's gliders in a black wooden box is that as much as archives are authentic records of the past, archives are also ambiguous, and the knowledge that it offers is patchy. The provisionality of the gliders' historical existence in the present, that they could or could not have been let fly from a tower in Prague, is another potential, I think, not only of the work, but of how the work specifically exists now in the Zom archives, and potentially in MoMA. The awkwardness of the glider's history reminds us that the piecing together of the past is not a neutral enterprise, and that, as David Lowenthal aptly put, the actual past eludes us all. As a dwelling place for dislocated things with sometimes awkward histories, the archival space might be just as useful for its seemingly rational repositories as much as for its vulnerabilities, uncertainties, and the unknown of how the past exists in the present. Not just matters of fact, but also matters of care. Maria Puig de la Bella Casa, from whom I borrow the term matters of care, elucidates on the affective mode of caring in the context of the archive that goes beyond just affection, curiosity, or the sentimental attachment to things. To quote Bella Casa, rather than indicating a method to unveil what matters of fact are, matters of care suggest that we engage with them so they generate more caring relationalities. In other words, construing archival holdings as matters of care sheds light on the ethical obligation that emerges from our relations with the remains of a past that is not static, but changes in different hands. Part of this obligation, as Bella Casa suggests, is to engage deeply with the provocation of how to care, which I think is what has brought so many of us here today to consider the notion of activation at its crux, a question of how to care so that the Fluxus legacy keeps on living. And now I will pass to Argan.
Thank you, Josie. So I will build on this case study presented by Josephine, and my bit of presentation will address two apparently similar, but actually very different questions, which is in what manner could a Fluxus artwork subsist within an archive, and how might a Fluxus artwork endure within an archive? And this is Eckhart Archive and MEMCO, and this is kind of addressing the first one, for the first of the questions, which is the legacy of Fluxus can live in an archive in the form of, as we can see, three-dimensional objects, textual objects such as scores, instructions, ephemera, publications, documentation formats such as photographs, videos, audio recordings, etc. And we have already have seen some of the formats in the example brought by Josephine. And this example also showed us how those categories can start overlapping if one makes a paper glider, a three-dimensional object, out of a sheet of paper with instructions on it. But what is interesting is that for works for art that are processual and or performative in nature, or which have this processual/performative possibility or potential, and this is certainly the case of Fluxus art, one artwork can be manifested in the archive through all those different forms and formats. And we could see that happening with Knižák Paper Gliders project, but as well as in the case of this piece that we can see on the slide, which is the Orange Event number 3 by Bengt af Kleitenbarre. Fluxus artwork can exist at the same time and often in the same archive as written instructions, as an art object which is an interpretation of a score, or a visual manifestation of a score, or a remnant from the performance, or all the three things in one, as in the case of this print, for example, with a photograph that we can see on the slide. Another way a Fluxus artwork can exist in our archive is as a photographic or video documentation of the performance, or the report from the live event, as we can see on the slide. And of course, there are other formats, all actually archival formats that we can think of. Also, in addition to more conventional forms of artistic production, if we think about artistic production in conventional terms, such as creation of physical objects or performance-based expressions, Fluxus engage in a diverse range of actions, events, gestures that were not necessarily regarded actually as art in the conventional sense back then, particularly within the domain of visual arts. And those activities were as diverse as organizing and coordinating concerts, festivals, and exhibitions, as well as designing, publishing, promoting, distributing, and networking. And for artists from Fluxus circles, all these endeavors were understood on equal footing as art. And those practices of Fluxus artists often left behind only documents of various kinds, be they textual, visual, or objectual. However, it is often difficult to establish a clear division between a document and an artwork. And this is especially true for the work of the artist that intentionally employed practices that defied the traditional categories of art and art making, such as the musical, the visual, and the performative, or work towards blurring the boundaries between art and life. And yeah, I would like to pause here and look closer at the notion of this objectual document. That was actually exemplified to a certain extent by the Knižák box full of paper gliders that Josephine showed us before, but also by the many examples of Intermedia chart that kind of became an objectualized something very much between an object, art object, and document, right? But other examples of objectual objects are objectual or objectualized effects of an artistic action, event, or performance. And I think we are kind of familiar with the example on the slide where we can see Namjoon Paik performing Clemente Young's event score and all the remnants and follow-ups of this action. And here the objectual document is this, for example, this famous photograph that can be exhibited on its own. The direct outcome from the performance, which is this a large paper with a line painted on it with Namjoon Paik's head. And the tie that was accidentally implicated in the process of painting it, accidentally or not accidentally, we can discuss that later. And objectual documents may also include what Natalie Haring calls in her writing notational objects. So objects whose form and appearance implies performative engagement with which might be evidenced through accompanying instruction or might not. So without being active, those objects might actually be regarded as documents that imply a possibility of a performative action to be taken or an evidence of such an action that took place in the past. And I know that this is kind of a controversial example, but I'm not showing it to be controversial, but it just to show and kind of highlight that something that can be easily categorized as an artwork within this realm that we are talking about can be actually regarded as document, and the other way around. So obscuring the categories of art, documentation, and archival materials and questioning our presumptions about what constitutes the proper site for art, Fluxus artworks constantly disobey the practices concerned with the afterlife of art, such as archiving, collecting, preserving, and conserving. And let's think now just for a while, like how conservators would actually approach this Namjoon Paik tie. Probably not as an artwork. That means that while choosing conservation strategies, they will not necessarily take into account its aesthetical or artistic qualities, but most likely as a historical artifact, right? But in that case, who takes care of the perpetuation of the actual artwork? And how to preserve this process-oriented performative instruction or score-based art, which identity hinge on textual and objectual documents that communicate an artwork only when kept together and interact, and that's within the archive and beyond. How to secure continuation of works that depend on fragmented information distributed among records in different forms, shapes, and media. And to address this question, I will examine this notion of activation and the potential implication that arrives from it. And I will start by tracing its use and meanings across briefly, okay, but across two distinct fields, which is art conservation and archival science. In the field of conservation, the activation of an artwork, be it a performance piece or installation art with media components, is to bring it back from the dormant state to the active state, in which it can communicate with the public. Sometimes used as alternative concept to reconstruction, activation is more than a mere occurrence, and it involves imbuing something with liveness and vitality rather than simply recreating or replicating it. Consequently, activation may indicate the need for modification, such as actualizing, updating, and adjusting to a different context and often also formats and mediums. Right. So what about the archival sciences? And in this field, in this postmodern archive that we are talking about today, one can no longer regard the record as a static artifact with fixed boundaries or contents and contexts. And building from this pre-assumption, Dutch theories of archive Eric Ketelaar calls every interaction, every intervention, interrogation, and interpretation by creator, user, and archivist an activation of the archival record. So this is kind of how the activation is thought of within this field by some. He also suggests that every activation leaves an imprint of the record. This is very interesting and important, and changes the significance of earlier activations. So, drawing on this two approaches from two different distinct fields that share an interest in preservation, I propose to conceptualize activation within the archival realm as a methodological approach that entails the engagement with archival records that relate to the artwork. And this engagement involves close reading, interpretation, and comparative analysis, both within and beyond the archival context. The overarching objective of this approach is to develop strategies that will effectively bring the artwork into an active state in which it can communicate with the public. And those strategies of activation that fit this definition are being performed and applied already, often organically or intuitively in many Fluxus archives already. And actually, Patrizio presentation somehow very nicely show great examples of it. And I hope we will hear more about those strategy and hear more examples from the speakers during our today event. And that's how we kind of came to this idea of activation toolkit, and the actual aim of this encounter, one of the aims, let's say. And this aim is to put together this activation toolkit for art archives of the avant-garde art of 1960s and 1970s. And this activation toolkit is thought of a structured set of resources, tools, and strategies gathered to inspire individuals and organizations that oversee archives and collections holding Fluxus works to perpetuate those works through activation and for engaging with the archive creatively. And this slide shows where we are in this process, which is kind of, it is not organized and not systematized yet, but it will be systematized, kind of set of examples of activation that happen in art archives, examples that will be discussed here today, or those which we have or will encounter during our research. Besides the custodians of Fluxus legacy, it can be as well a useful resource for curators aiming to present Fluxus works in exhibition, or it can be used as an educational tool. And here we have some examples of those strategies, just kind of words to trigger kind of reaction and discussion here. So we have interpretation, continuation, completion, execution, publishing or republishing, exhibition, migration, reconstructions, and there can be many, many more. And those categories overlap, and they need to be well defined to become a part of the toolkit. And also, they will be finally scrutinized as a possible tool for conservation. So, just to wrap up, I think that this toolkit metaphor emphasizes the importance of, first of all, broadening the range of resources and tools for perpetuation of Fluxus art, but also the need for skill and expertise in using those tools effectively. And finally, there's also just a playful engagement with Fluxus formats and kits, boxes and toolboxes, and invite to explore and engage with Fluxus legacy creatively. Thank you so much. Thank you.
So much, both speakers. Thank you, Aga. Thank you, Josephine. We welcome questions from our guests here and attendees of the symposium here, and also from our everyone who is attending online. And while you're thinking, if I'm correct, perhaps I could just start this conversation off with something that very much interested me, and I think is inherent to both of your presentations, both in the paper glides, which were really beautifully presented by Josie, and in this amazing toolkit that Aga presented, and the thoughts on activation. I think reconstruction somehow, I don't know, somewhere there, the notion of reconstruction popped up. And I wonder how might it be related to these notions that Aga mentioned, of different sorts of activations and archival states, but also in the paper glides, Josie, in your case, how might perhaps reconstruction offer us, yet another kind of tool to bring those paper glides to life, to let them fly again?
Would you like to start, Josie?
Yeah, sure, I can. Yeah. Well, I think that probably the reconstruction, I think, speaks to the potential that is within, for example, the paper gliders. Because if it's just a possibility, for example, that really limits the amount that maybe we can do with these things when we're kind of navigating this tricky boundary between preserving a historic artifact, but also making sure that it kind of, the spirit of it keeps on living. So whereas kind of reconstruction may not necessarily be a possibility of the work, which might be more confined to, we should kind of, let's carry out these actions, or for example, I think with reconstruction as a potentiality, as kind of maybe kind of broadening what we can do with the score, then that is kind of that kind of is that's a way that it could be activated in a way that's not kind of necessarily just written in the actions, for example. So if they were remade, like the papers, for example, yeah.
I mean, it's interesting because for me the problem is always that I feel that some of those terms are not. We have to kind of like get to the point that we speak about the same when we speak about reconstruction as well, right? Because like seeing from many different fields and approaches and within different discourses, reconstruction can be something different, right? And so that's somehow I think that to kind of be able to speak about reconstruction as a mode of activation, we have to go back and kind of think about what we would like to understand this reconstruction. Because it can be, I mean, from this field of, for example, technical art history, reconstruction is something else. I mean, it is something else, or ontologically maybe it is the same. But yeah, we just have to kind of examine those notions and think about them deeply. I think that if we speak about reconstruction of the paper gliders in a very kind of direct way, that maybe we could imagine that we're just making the paper gliders, the same paper gliders, maybe they should look the same or feel the same as those original paper gliders. Somehow the reconstruction, they're having this at the very beginning is something that kind of brings us back. And that's why we're speaking also about activation and reactivation, right? Because we are thinking, like, we're trying to circulate about those ideas of like looking more forward than back. I don't know if that answers your question.
Sometimes you don't even, there's not a concrete event to look back to as well. So then how do we, how do we then go? What becomes the reference point? It's actually more kind of now, maybe could be another reference point, like how they exist, for example, in storage, and not necessarily just going back.
Absolutely, no, and I love the answers you provided. I think it also offers us, the kind of possibility to think about the event as a form of perhaps enactment, or a part of reconstruction. But yes, just in the interest of time, we might take it to the discussion. But yes, Sally Kawamura, another question, very brief one because we are running almost.
Sure, thank you. This is just. I'm just curious about the paper gliders that you were talking about in the box. And I just wanted to clarify, were you saying that these paper gliders were not the ones that had been thrown from a tower, so therefore they could have been a reconstruction themselves?
Yeah, so I think I wasn't sure. What was my conclusion? Because from what I could make out, I didn't think they were. But at the same time, like there's kind of no way of knowing really. So so my conclusion was kind of inconclusive.
What gave you the impression that they hadn't been through? Were they too clean, or was it?
Because for the event called Make a Paper Glider, that seemed to be an action in itself. Like that was the directive, and then from the photographs and there are also kind of Knižák has reflections on kind of this event that happened, that everyone was bringing their papers and they were making it. So there wasn't anything, I don't know, like written on the gliders that were thrown. So that's what kind of makes me think that they were different. Whereas on the ones in the box, for example, they have actions to be carried out, or they kind of reflect, they kind of are documents of things that had happened already. So that was
That's so interesting. Thank you.
Just very brief last one.
Just a comment. In 2011, Petra Stegmann curated an exhibition, Fluxus East, and they performed exactly this piece.
Really?
And in Berlin, in the Kunsthaus Bethanien, and they had actually paper gliders, which were there, and there were also slices of paper with instructions, so people could fold their own gliders, and they were thrown down, and people actually collected them very carefully. So people took them home. So it's sort of a reenactment, but
was Luigi involved?
I think so. Yes, he was there, right? No, he wasn't there. But I know that Petra is very close with of like the artists in the East. So yeah.
Just one thing to add to what you said. It's very nice, but you need to consider as well. Paper glider is the paradox. It is a paradox. It's a political paradox. It's Czechoslovakia 65. And it's the paradox, if you have it fly away, you cannot proceed anymore. So it is an eternal paradox, which is nice. It's a beautiful word.
Great. Well, thank you so much.
Can I just ask, did you address the question to Milan Kmisak as he's still alive?
He's alive, but I haven't
just
yet.
No, I've got time.
Yeah, but I think we will.
Yeah.
I know that Jose is at the very beginning of her research right now. It's really 2 months into it, actually. But thank you so much for all your comments, and let's join me in thanking our speakers. Now, we have the pleasure. We are running 5 minutes past the schedule, but it's all fine. We have the pleasure to welcome our next speaker, Hubertus von Amelunxen, who is the director of the Archivio Cons in Berlin, and who will present the concept of large exhibition dedicated to Sammlung Cons, Archivio Cons.
Everything is shared. I don't have to do anything anymore.
Yeah, it's just here.
Okay, and I can just go.
Just go. It's okay?
Yeah. It's perfect.
This is the
Yeah. Okay. Hello, everybody here, and thank you very much for the invitation. And everybody, the phantoms outside. So, in fact, there are two things. One is, I would like to present Francesco Cons, his collection, which is catalogued in Berlin, and the concept of an exhibition for next year. I will just have those photos and works running. They are just a kind of, not commentary, I'm not commenting them at all. I hope you can read the names of the artists. And it will be about roughly 2 seconds each image, because I have 200. So there's one thing which is the idea of the exhibition, and the other one is Francesco Cons. He was an Italian collector. Many of you know him. He was a publisher and photographer, born 1935 and died 2010. He collected contemporary international art from the 60s until his death in 2010, and published over 550 art editions, the Edizioni Cons. The collection includes about 6,000 artworks and 35,000 photographs, and is catalogued in Berlin since 2016. While Francesco Cons himself had organized numerous exhibitions of his editions worldwide during his lifetime, his collection is now being presented for the first time. Or should we say, not the collection, but the collecting of Francesco Cons. Because for him, the collection was a lifelong performance. And in fact, it has remained and will be in the becoming a performative collection. By this, I mean this collection reaches out of its time through time, both remaining in its time and redefining itself in other time. It is a diachronic collection, precisely because it is so attached to the moment. We can call it often deferred originality, a collection of a deferred, or the artwork of a deferred originality. And we may discuss this later. What is a deferred originality towards the question of reproduction, reconstruction, etc. Happenings survive in their transience attached to the event. Cons was obsessed with contemporaneity. As a collector who collected the art of his time, as a publisher who brought artworks of the 1950s and 60s into his time with silk screens and portfolios.
You just had a picture.
What? Nobody saying that? And as an obsessive photographer for whom every moment was a shocking transformation of time. It could be that Francesco Cons developed from this reason of contemporaneity the almost religious veneration of the fluxing artists and performers, similar to the busy capriciousness that George Maciunas developed for his diagrams of the derivation of the arts from the circus games in the Roman Circus Maximus to the present. The fact that this exhibition, which I forgot to say is called In the Name, the collection of Francesco Cons, the fact that this exhibition is taking place in the former Cistercian monastery of Eberbach, elevated in the 12th century and secularized 2 centuries ago, instead of in a white cube museum or art gallery, is no coincidence, but rather the intention. The collection includes mainly works from the environment of concrete and visual poetry, sound art, hypergraphy, and Fluxus. After meeting with the artists Hermann Nietzsche, Günter Bruce, and Joe Jones in Berlin in 1972, Francesco created a residence for artists in Palazzo Baglioni in Asolo in 1973. Quote, Francesco Cons, "My road to Damascus is called Asolo, the date of my conversion in 1972. However, Francesco Cons was not converted to Christ like St. Paul, but to Hermann Nietzsche's theater of orgies and mysteries, to poetry and to Fluxus. In Palazzo Baglioni in Asolo, he invited Nietzsche, Günter Bruce, and many others to create work. Okay, works during 7 years. Those invitations to Asolo and later to Verona were founded in a deep hospitality. Okay?
Go.
Okay, I don't remember the word. An ethic of hospitality as handed down in the religious rules of St. Benedict. Francesco called the artists his saints and the equally extensive fetish collection his relics. The exhibition in the name is not only about the symbolic proximity, okay, of art and sanctuary to the collector. If one were to look for logic or a consequence in the collecting activity of Francesco Cons, it lies in the constellation of language, sound, writing, image, and procession, ritual. In those systems, he is collecting, has been collecting. Let me get. Born in 1935 in Cittadella in the Veneto region, so near to here, into more or less wealthy family, Cons abandons his studies in 1958 and first travels Europe to learn languages. 6 he will speak and write. Language as image as text is his medium. The entanglement of letters and asemic signs and image, the illuminated manuscript. He was in fact a translator. Had he come from a novel, Umberto Eco, a semiotician and novelist, would have written it. Francesco Cons, a man spiritually between the knowledge of a scribe and the belief in the transcendence of aesthetic experience. Realist, as gargantuan fantasist, writer, he became literally when in the 80s of the 20th century, he began to silkscreen concrete, visual poetry, and others from Eugen Gomminger, Campos Brothers, Rühm, Robert Lax, Ferlinghetti, Emmett Williams, Ken Friedman, Jack Hirschman, Zach, and many, many others. As in large format as signed and numbered serigraphs on cloth, canvas, or imitation leather. Francesco Cons exhibited the typeface. The typefaces were to be able to hang everywhere, as a shower curtain on the wall, as we see it here, as a picture drawn on a stretcher frame, or as a bedspread. In his homage to Francesco Cons in 1992, Eugen Gobringer, the great poet, wrote, Cons prints in large format what was thought large, even it was created quietly. Francesco Cons might bring to mind Baudelaire's rag picker, the hero of modernity who interprets the remnants of history and assembles them into new constellations full of hope. The rag and bone man is the dialectical Diogenes. Walter Benjamin described him with regard to the collector Ernst Fuchs as the dialectical collector. That was and is Francesco Cons, and herein lies the incomparability of his archive. The special value of his fetish collection also becomes understandable in his collecting philosophy. Friends initially spoke with amusement of trash, clothes, shoes, hats, materials for the production of art, empty signed wine bottles, plates marked with paint. Pierre Soulages gave him a stool, a large brush painted black. Just like the thousands and thousands of photographs Francesco Cons ceaselessly made of everyone who surrounded him. Everything was directed toward a future whose particular constellation of art's legibility could yet not be foreseen. Artist and friend Geoffrey Hendricks wrote of Cons' secret museum at Cappella Fasani in Arezzo, his own residential museum that he set up with the artists above Verona. I quote Geoffrey Hendricks. The development of Francesco's fetish collection is in the spirit of the art he collected, making the archive something like the work it archives. This is the sentence for us. Making the archive something like the work it archives. After an always special meal together, Francesco had everyone sign the wine bottle. Several of these are in the secret museum. At times, relics were transformed into art. At other times, art was transformed into relics. Still, Geoffrey Hendricks. Like a good wine, these relics and artifacts become more interesting with time. In the spirit of Intermedia, happenings, Fluxus, conceptual art, and performative art, the transformation or discarding of the art object is always present as a possible act. The boundaries of art break down. The collection, I'm too fast now. I want to go, wait, I will go back. Okay. The boundaries of art break down. The collection is in the tradition of the Gesamtkunstwerk. End of quotation, Geoffrey Hendricks. Francesco Cons built his collection, his Mirabilia, to his church. Using artworks from Lettrisme, concrete poetry, and Fluxus, the Gesamtkunstwerk is unfolded that does not stem from any art movement, but rather considers the relationship of writing to the spoken, incantated word, sound and image from post-war period to the 21st century. Italian linguist, philosopher, and writer Umberto Eco is an unsolicited godfather to the exhibition in the name. His works, The Open Work of Art, Opera Aperta from 63, Sign, Introduction to Concept and History of the Sign, 73, The Name of the Rose, of course. And funny enough, the film was shot in the Kloster Eberbach, in this same location. And his book, In the Search of Perfect Language, reflect on the relationship between sign, world, and transcendence in the arts and beyond the arts. The important semiotics, his philosophy of language, and his original poetics of the open work of art provided the intellectual and narrative framework for his novel, The Name of the Rose, filmed in '86 by Jean-Jacques Hanna at Eberbach Monastery. This is a pure coincidence. The exhibition, The Name, goes back in thought and image to the relationship of the avant-garde to the Middle Ages. On the other hand, it refers to the open poetics as already outlined in '58 by Eco, with a reference to, quite famous and known, the depersonalization and collectivization of art through the ready-mades of Duchamp and the compositional aleatorics of John Cage, without ever needing the term of avant-garde. The development of national languages and the progressive decline of Latin is the language of theology, philosophy, and the arts, alongside the various orthodoxies of the Vatican councils, led to a linguistic critique of the verbal, vocal, and visual spirituality of expression, which I see, just to explain, exactly in Fluxus again, 800 years later. Abelard's Nulla Rosa Est is seen by Umberto Eco as an example not only of the nominalist debate that language also signifies things that do not exist, but also spans to 20th century poetics. A rose is a rose is a rose by Gertrude Stein. Unlike theoretical works of any kind, which at least in their reference and argumentation claim a correctness or logic or even a truth in what is meant, the work of art itself remains open to various constellations of contemplation and interpretation in time. These arts, and I'm speaking about Fluxus, of course, here, have a philosophical and existential ground. They are nevertheless not philosophy, not treatise, but singular expression in the contemplation of time. I will stop here, and the last big part of activating is having activated now within the archive, Francesco Cons in Berlin, the living room, which was opened, in fact, not even a week ago in Berlin, on 3 days with performances. And you see the performance here. It is the opening, and in the living room. And here is Luciano Chiesa performing Walter Macchetti's Natura Morta from 1981. And here you have Esther Ferrer performing the theory and practice of performance. Esther Ferrer in front of La Noche of Marta Marchetti. And the whole opening days were dedicated to the Spanish group Zach. And then again, Esther Ferrer, fantastic performer, great, wonderful artist, as you see her. And you see the additions made by Francesco Cons on cloth behind. And then we had Robert Ashley, Maneuvers for Small Hands, again performed by Luciano Chiesa. And this is the activating, so inviting contemporary artists coming from literature, poetry, wherever from. And this is Sia Rinne, the laureate of the Bernard Heidsieck Prize, which was given by the Fondazione Bonotto and Centre Pompidou, and where I'm happy now to be engaged as well. And she's reading a work and performing a work called Sentence. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Hubertus. It was really brilliant to gain this insight into the Archivio Council and into your amazing ideas about those works. We do welcome questions from here, from the room, but also online, if someone would like to ask. And if I may take the freedom to ask just the first one, I'm very interested in your notion of diachronicity and the third originality. When you speak about the relic, I think this is something that came to me, I think, most kind of potently through your arguments. And I wonder whether you could kind of, elaborate a little bit more on this notion. it is, I think, a flip side of our, or perhaps not, of our kind of more active thinking about the archive, right? But the relics are there. I just wonder whether, you know, the relic represents for you something that is disjoint from the present and something that represents the original artistic intention, or whether this is something that also persists, exists, and is perpetuated in the contemporaneity, in the now.
I think that would be several things now. So one thing is certainly that the diachronicity is fundamental, as first simply saying going through time. But once we start going through time, we have to ask, what does this mean? I mean, we are not time travelers. So there's a certain moment where a work of art has been created, and there's a moment how it has been carried through time and history, and there's a moment where we, as being one part of spectators or of the aesthetic horizon, are experiencing this work of art. And you will, of course, always favor your own experience, but I think in favoring it, you should not, you're not obliged to, but you should not forget, not the historicization, saying it may have been experienced better before, no, different. And you accumulate those differences. This is a bit the Machunas thinking of the diagram. Because what he does is, what Machunas does, he created a three-dimensional diagram going through time. I mean, 2000, sorry. I'm in time, it's good.
You're perfect in time.
So 2,000 years, we have to, so this is the one aspect. The other aspect of deferred originality is something, you know, we speak about but we have to see, what is this re? Like take the notion of reproduction. What is a reproduction? But a production which is repeated. It may be done by technical media. I mean, you take Benjamin's essay, of course. It is meant to spread the work, but there remains an original. And perhaps the fact, and take Warhol as well, that's another example, perhaps the fact that the work, once it is reproduced, something is taken from it into the reproduction. So every reproduction as well is a kind of deferred original. So it's not only the original and the reproduced, but there's always a third in between, which touches both. So this is what I mean by deferred originality. And I think this is important because it teaches us, as well as you do with activating Fluxus, to place the object or even the sound in its diachronic, historical, timely dimensions. Not nostalgic at all, but always towards something to come. This is the art always towards to come. This is what I mean by deferred.
Thank you so much. I would have so many comments.
Go ahead.
And specifically, you know, in relation to a work which might be a work concept that might be kind of, say, a work concept that entails a work unfolding rather than, you know, created in the past and reactivated or reproduced and so on. I think that the vocabulary also, I think that was very aptly put by Aga, the vocabulary here stands quite often in the way, because if we are addressing those issues from our, you know, disciplinary perspective, we always involve our own kind of educational background, our own kind of disciplinary apparatus. But yeah, I think what we are trying slightly to do in the activated Fluxus project is to, you know, think of the work as something more unfolding and less tethered to this conception, to this point in time to which you return to reproduce the work or to perpetuate it. But yes, it is, I think, a start of a wonderful conversation. So thank you so much. Any other questions, comments?
Yeah, may I?
Please.
I always thought about the operation
of Francesco Cons as a mystic approach. So like a foundation of a new religion of art. And so there is the saints, the artists, we have the new mass, rituality with sharing bread and wine, so you can sign it, no? And so a real new religion, and the edition as a reliquary to send all over to spread this new religion, no? And I wonder if this aspect it will be highlighted in the project you're building up, because I think it's very fundamental. And what is Fluxus? No, what is Fluxus? This is a good question. Good Fluxus also. What is Francesco Cons? It's a mystery. So it's really a religion. It's something mysterious that we are continually wondering what we do, why we do that, and is a continuous source of questions, no? So like a really religion, and a lot of people who met him fall into this religion, become collector, etc. No, so is this aspect?
Yeah, I mean, this is probably why, because I did never meet him, so I did not follow this. but I'm involved, and I agree. You knew very well. And I agree with you, but and this is the reason why now I did not speak so much about Fluxus, but about a collector who was fluxing. So it is like you say. I mean, you all know there's a profound relation between Fluxus and religion, a very important relation. But he was, as you say, and I agree with you. I mean, you know, there's the saying, the Roman Church. Is just has become a business, like a Coca-Cola business. There's nothing, there's no belief, there's no magic. And for him, he was in the magic. And so everything that he created, this idea, and Secret Museum, of course, was the magic, the auratic and the magic. So there was a certain, like a pagan belief in there for our gods. I would not go so far as you go now with a new religion. But it certainly is for the working in the archive that Francesco Cons is a highly important figure. And of course, we can do a lot because he's dead. So I can make a complete new interpretation of Francesco Cons. And I learn all the time. But this means that you have not only the work of art, but you have another instance which is there. It is like he himself, in a text Cons once wrote and about what are the ideas of all the dead artists in Fluxus. And he imagined how Geoffrey Hendricks was looking down from his clouds and others, a beautiful small thing. And this is now with Francesco on his own archive.
Yes, it's a mystic way.
There is, I agree with Mystic.
He talked about himself about his own experience, like a conversion in the São Paulo way. So São Paulo was the one who built up the church, no? With St. Peter. So
and he went to Nice.
Yeah.
No, I agree. The orgies and mysteries. Yeah.
Perfect. I think we will. There is one comment from Hiltrud Schnitzel here in the chat, which she clarified. I think this is more of a kind of comment that pertaining to the kind of relationship between the materiality of Fluxus and the reality of more stable objects. And she clarifies further, as far as this is all what Fluxus is about, even before the digital revolution, also concerning democracy. There's very rich, I think, content here that we might take into our afternoon discussion. Also, Ken Friedman we have one comment from our dear friends and artist Ken Friedman, who states, if you think about the concept of an event score, this is a small work that exists in several states. One of the states is an idea, pure and immaterial. If someone has a good memory, they can possess the entire corpus of Fluxus event scores purely in mind as immaterial art. Yeah. In some traditions, the memorized and spoken text is the only true text, while the written and published copy of the text is a material reproduction of the real text or words. And I think it's very aptly put. Would you like to comment?
Yeah, but this is no. If we start now, because this is it's all. Hello, Ken, wherever he is. It's a grammatological concept, because this is the concept I wanted to speak about. Is the writing a materialization or not? So, what is the relation in writing? Let's take the scope. So he's again with his words is taking up the whole discussion with Cage, with Echo, with Benny of the 50s of the determined or indeterminate score, and with the score the process of signification. So I would not start there now. But thank you for the good question. Comment. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for the answer. Thanks so much, everyone, for commenting and asking and joining in.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. We are perfectly on time, meaning 5 minutes past the time, as we were an hour ago. And our next speaker will be Laura Montanari and Alessandro Gazzotti, who will join us online. And will share their presentation. The title of the presentation is Long Live Fluxus, and we are very excited. Over to you.
Hello,
Alessandro.
Hello, can you hear us? Okay, thank you. We are very happy to be here, although in a remote way, and we would like to thank you for inviting us. And let me introduce ourselves. I'm Alessandro Gazzotti, the curator of the artistic collection of the Civic Museums of Reggio Emilia, and she's Laura Montanari, the owner of the Archivio Pari e Dispari here in Reggio Emilia. And we would like to tell in this panel about the peculiar case of Reggio Emilia and the collaboration born between a private archive, the Archive Pari e Dispari, and a public institution like Musei Civici and the Panizzi Library. And now I give the floor to Laura Montanari. And just a moment, I share the screen for our presentation. Okay.
Hello, good morning, everyone, from Reggio Emilia. The link between the Fluxus movement and Italy becomes very close in the early 1970s, when artists met collectors, publishers, gallery owners who enthusiastically support their production, promote events, works, publication, and edition. Small realities like Reggio Emilia and Asolo became pools of attraction, aggregation, and promotion of Fluxus artists from the United States, Europe, Japan, and Korea. But why Fluxus in Reggio Emilia? Reggio Emilia became one of the historic cities of the Fluxus movement in Italy, thanks to the work and the intelligence of Rosanna Chiesi, promoter of avant-garde and discoverer of talent in the second half of the 20th century. Rosanna, who in 1971 created Pari e Dispari, first as a publishing house and then as an art gallery, promotes artists from all the world, over more than 50 years, particularly from the Italian conceptual area, visual poets, Viennese actionism, Fluxus, performance art, and the Gutai movement. She organizes events, festival, exhibition, installation, concerts, and participates in international fairs, also in collaboration with museums. The principal concepts. The search of an identity between art and life has guided her choices and passion, identifying its realization in the performing arts and bringing her together with the Fluxus movement, with whom she has been strongly in tune since her first contact. This is the house of Rosanne, and this is Joe Jones, you can see. This symbiosis of art and everyday life is experienced with Fluxus artists in Rosanna's house, Rosanna homes and galleries, which become center for the production of works and performance. Joe Jones and Takako Saito were the first Fluxus artists from 1974 to be for a long time hosted at Rosanna house. This is Takako. Where they created numerous works later exhibited at major international fairs and museums. Here you can see Rosanna, Namjoon Paik, Charlotte Moorman in 1975 in Basel. Then in 1976 by the performance in Naples, and the participation in Arte Fiera in Bologna in collaboration with Peppe Morra, in which its performance took place in 8 days. And in 1977, we can see the trip to New York, where she met Machunas and all the main Fluxus artists, with whom she would remain linked by a deep friendship. From 1977, in the farmhouse art laboratory in Cavriago, and later until the 20s, in Rosanna's other place of activity, Capri, Reggio Emilia, Berlin, there have been international art festivals, exhibition, performance, events, production of works, art edition, and multiples, in which the historical group of Fluxus artists friends are involved. Over 30 artists, Dick Higgins, Bob Watts, Alison Knowles, Philip Coren, the principal group of Fluxus movement. The farmhouse in Cavriago today would be called a campus artist residence and workshop, with participation assigned through calls for proposal, selection, but it was simply Rosanna's house, where she lived and shared space with artists who came from all over. She had no public funding or sponsorship from economic entities, and her resources were scarce, but maximum was the degree of freedom of expression and contamination between artists and different languages. In house in Cavriago, this is a work, this is a work of Diderot in 1976. The house in Cavriago and the town also involved became an international art center. This is a beautiful photograph of Jackson McLaw in 1977 in New York, and this is a Christmas dinner with Allison, the song, Dick Higgins, Jeff. The photographs are made by Miro Zagnoli, a famous photograph. I am saying the house in Cavriago and the town always involved became an international art center for 14 years, characterized by the organization of 18 art festivals and numerous exhibitions and performances. activities that attract hundreds of avant-garde artists, such as leading representatives of the Fluxus movement. It's a beautiful photo. Francesco Cons, it was summer, and they have no clothes. Francesco, Bob Watts, Milan Knigza, the wife, and Rosanna, the house of Rosanna, and this is my mother. These activities attract hundreds of avant-garde artists, such as leading representatives of the Fluxus movement, visual poetry, Viennese actionism, and photographs. There is also where the project of Namjoon Paik's beautiful exhibition, I think perhaps the best in Italy, realized in collaboration with the municipality of Reggio Emilia in 1990 was born. But I think that the secret of all this is in the determination and willingness of the person to get involved in a regime of great open-mindedness, collaboration and respect for rules, just as her friends Francesco Cons did in Veneto. When I think about my mother built and how she lived, and not just her, and try to project it to the present day, it really seems like living in a world that has nothing in common. But one should not fall into a romantic view of life, the resignation that things are not longer the same. These are not. This is not good. Now, Alessandro Gazzotti speak about archives and the relationship of with public authorities and museums.
Thank you, Laura. I would like to start with the exhibition that Laura introduced before, the exhibition of Namjoon Paik held in 1990 at the Chiostro di San Domenico, Reggio Emilia. An exhibition promoted by the municipality of Reggio Emilia, but whose realization was made possible thanks to Rosanna Chiesi, a great friend and supporter of the artist. Paik's exhibition is still cited as an example of the great openness towards international art and culture that characterized Reggio Emilia's cultural policies in these years. These are some pictures about the exhibition. This is Namjoon Paik in Chiostro di San Domenico. Another example, few years later, is the exposition that Musei Civici di Reggio Emilia dedicated to Pari Dispari, celebrating 25 years of activity. The exhibition was titled Pari Dispari, 25 Years of Seduction, of which you can see some images. It's a very rich retrospective of works from the Pari Dispari archive, at the opening of which Pierre Restany also participated. Among the many other initiatives, we would also like to mention Appeal to Dream, in which Rosanna asked several international artists to reinterpret the pillow. In fact, a very frequent practice of Rosanna was to have artists reinterpret everyday objects and action in a poetic key. Rosanna Chiesi's legacy is currently kept and valorized at the Pari Dispari Archive, at the Civic Museum, and at the Panizzi Library of Reggio Emilia. Regarding the latter, Rosanna always aimed to have concrete relationships with cultural institutions and museums, and according to her own words, she never hid that she wanted to leave a strong mark in her city, Reggio Emilia. In this sense, should be seen the acquisition in 2008 of no less than 137 works from the Pari Dispari Archive by the municipality of Reggio Emilia, which were then included in the collection of the Civic Museum. The acquired heritage was then divided according to the type of materials and enhancement conditions between the museum and the Panizzi Library. This seemingly normal fact definitively sanctioned that the work of Rosanna Chiesi and Pari Dispari becomes part of the city histories and memory. Although independent and disconnected and sometimes opposed from the official circuits of art, which here in Reggio Emilia were nonetheless, along with the neighboring Modena, a hotbed of avant-garde and experimentation from the early 60s to the 70s, Rosanna's works produce remarkable fruits and sold a cultural attitude that is present and alive today. In 2014, the Civic Museum of Reggio Emilia inaugurated the new temporary museum spaces, designed by architect Italo Rota. A good 1,400 additional square meters of exhibition space, immediately occupied by a large exhibition entitled For Inspiration Only, a true manifesto with which the Civic Museum of Reggio Emilia retold their role within contemporary culture from the perspective of research and experimentation. It was precisely in this rethinking of memory as an archive of the commons, according to the famous definition proposed by Claire Bishop, and in the desire to offer people an experience capable of developing critical faculties and the ability to act in their own time, we decided to enhance the heritage of Pari Dispari in a very strong way with a major year-long exhibition entitled Pari Dispari, 50 Years of Research. The exhibition, introduced by a large synoptic tableau that contained a big selection of historical photographs, traced all the stages of Pari Dispari by giving ample space to the exponent of the Fluxus movement and their production made up to the 90s. This is Rosanna. As a corollary to the exhibition, I interviewed Rosanna Chiesi, who retraced, also thanks to the projection of a video, the main stages of her life, lived under the banner of art and the avant-garde. This is some exhibition views of the exhibition in 2014. The photographs on display were then donated after Rosanna's death to the Panizzi Library, who edited the publication on its website of all the 54 albums of very important photographic archive of Pari Dispari. Some of that picture Laura shows before. Each of these albums have been sorted and annotated by Rosanna, and they testify all of her activity from the late 60s until 2015. The photographic font is fully scanned and visible online. These are some artwork
Eric Andersen
in the Civic Museums of Reggio Emilia collections, and these are other exhibition view of the exhibition. The armchair of Ben Patterson and Shimamoto painting the desire to leave a path and a testimony of the art of this time is also documented by unique works and editorial production of more than 100 editions conceived with the artist, with the materials often produced with handmade paper in Cavriago and with a wide range of expressive models. In addition to the institution, the fund donated to and acquired by the municipality of Reggio Emilia to the Panizzi Library and the Civic Museum, with their rich collection of works and editions, the legacy left by Rosanna is safeguarded by the Pari Dispari Archive, who collects works, catalogs, and editions produced by her in over 50 years of activity. The archive also has a rich website, www.paridispari.org. In more recent years, relationships have been strengthened with cultural institutions and museums who support and popularize artistic movement of the second half of the 20th century throughout the country, through exhibition, publication, and physical and virtual archives. These include Palazzo Magnani, Mambo Museum in Bologna, the Civic Museum of Reggio Emilia and the Panizzi Library, and we want to mention the loan of the images sent to the Maxi Museum in Rome in 2022. Laura?
Sì. Andiamo un attimo alla foto da Palazzo Corso Garibaldi. It was here. It was present also Bonotto. I remember perhaps to the inauguration of the
Palazzo Magnani.
Palazzo Magnani. It was a fellow Fluxus along the principal street of the city. A performance by Bruno Picariello with all the cars of the period with sapone.
Well, washed by
washed. Okay. And but the future. The future of the movement, I think, is now. We are in the future. Also, speaking like today is the future. And the future is to have a relationship with the private gallery only. Stability of the relationship built in the past by pari dispari and the friends and promoters of the Fluxus movement, as well as the expressive variety of the artist, language, music, poetry, dance, etc., the profound humor and nonsense, the abandonment of tradition, aesthetic value constitutes a bond that goes beyond institutional, commercial, and archival tenors, still involves private space. This aspect makes Fluxus artists very contemporary and appealing to many private galleries and cultural centers that with their own events make the movement known outside the museum circuits. In this regard, I mention only two Fluxus exhibitions that have pari dispari as protagonists within 2 years. Fluxus Arte Totale in Naples last year, and the upcoming exhibition of Flux Motus, the avant-garde in the city, to be held in May 13, now, in a few days. The future. It's the future of Fluxus, or how it will be transformed, starts from the knowledge and then the dissemination of the cultural phenomenon to public and private cultural institutions using different media. The Fluxus message is also conveyed by reproducing performance events that made the movement famous, explaining their meaning, reinterpreting them, or staging projects that were conceived or never realized. One of the main channels can be music, which since the 20s has mainly attracted the younger generation of artists and musicians. I can give an example, perhaps the instruction of some of the McLaw works, such as First Mila Ripagata or Music Words for Phil Niblock, which can be reinterpreted by young musicians, or the works of the Higgins, which have already been the subject of reinterpretation, or the performance schemes of Bob Watts. This is our friends, big friends, Philby Corner with Deborah Walker in 2012 during the Fellow Fluxus in Reggio Emilia. The deal of this path, it is of great support. It is of great support the construction of a virtual promotion kit already initiated by the Bonotto Foundation that collects the past, the origin, the main message of the movement, and the activities and performances since 1960. The main performative and musical protagonist and events, the map of physical and virtual place that collect Fluxus archives in the world, the collection and the main exhibition. This tool must be shared among the promoters who undoubtedly in the first place the protagonist of activating Fluxus, which have to be disseminated among a museum, institution, foundation that have a specific section on Fluxus, distributed online to galleries and libraries, specialized journal, research institutes, university, create a cascade effect. Events that may arise from a dissemination of the movement may be collected and included in a section of the kit in an ever-expanding flow. At the end, we sincerely thank the Bonotto Foundation, Luigi Bonotto, for all their work in archiving and making public the artistic current and artists, promoting activating Fluxus and Fluxus art for all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Laura Montanari and Alessandro Gazzotti. It was very, very insightful, a very stimulating talk. We take now questions from the room here and from our online audiences. Are there any questions already? I can also kind of start, but with a very kind of clarifying question, very brief one. Is the archive actually still open, or is it a closed entity? Does it, is it open to accept new acquisitions or objects, papers, documents, or is it something that you consider closed?
The archive, the physical archive of Pari e Dispari. Sorry for my English. Sorry for the archive of Pari e Dispari physically is not daily open. If someone want to see, I can by appointment to show the archive. But in this year we have made a very big work with Panizzi Library and Museum. We have put online anything, the history, the photograph history of this archive, and I am doing the website Pari e Dispari, where I show all the artists, all the works that are in the archive. It's a long work, but I have already published so many artists, and all in any way all the Fluxus artists, and the works in museums and in library Panizzi. In the library Panizzi, we can also see books, and we can see the works on also by appointment, and also in the museum. Sometimes a library and museum makes exhibition, or even when they show the materials, and sometimes, but I think that the answer is yes. You can see the archive that are, in spite of all, online. But also, if you need to see something by appointment, you can see it.
Thank you so much. We also see someone posted, Wielocha has posted paridispari.org into the chat. So if people want to consult the website, it's there. I was actually thinking of another part of this kind of openness, whether the archive is actually something closed in terms of acquisitions and, taking objects into the archival structure, or is it something that is completely finalized, terminated, and a closed entity in these terms.
Chiede se come dire, è aperto anche nel senso che è aperto a nuove acquisizioni, non è aperta la possibilità di
Allora,
forse è una cosa chiusa in se stessa.
allora the archive was made with the works that Rosanna and produced with the artist produced with Rosanna in 50 years, and I am not Rosanna. I am another history, and what can I do is to show what she have made, and to show in the best way. I am not closed, but it's not my work to promote young artists. I can help to make event like the next event in Reggio May 13. But I am not a talent scout. I promote, and I in the best way.
That's perfect, Laura. I think it's such a rich research resource for everyone who is interested, and we invite people obviously to reach out if they need to pull the materials and to contact you. So thank you so much for clarifying. It's Anna. Anna Wielocha has a question here.
Yes, thank you, Laura, for this beautiful presentation. I just have one question regarding this collaboration with the museum, the Civic Museum in Reggio Emilia. And this acquisition of the part of the archive. So I was just wondering, what was the criterion of kind of like choosing the works that entered the museum collection?
The criterion we divided the kind of materials, or the criterion. Sorry.
How you made a choice? Like what comes into the museum, because you just acquired 100 something artworks, right? So how, like, what was the kind of like the basis of this choice?
We divided according to the type of material between us and the public library, because the public library have already a section dedicated to the artist book or artistic editions, and the acquisition was at the origin was made by the Civic Museum, but we thought that was better for the conservation, for the keeping of the material, to give this kind of material to the public library, and we take only the artwork in a most traditional way, like sorry, how can I say, like the opere uniche, the unique works, or this kind of okay, sorry, my English skills are very modest.
It's great.
I think puoi anche dire che la biblioteca ha tutte le edizioni.
Sì, sì. The public library have all the editions of Pari e Dispari. That was one of the activity of Pari e Dispari was as an editor, and he published a lot of multiples, but also editions of artist books, 100 artist book or something like that. And we expose in with kind of turnation some artworks. It depends on the type of exhibition of a cultural purpose that we held in some period. I don't know if
yes. I was actually I was curious about this division between this unique artworks and the additions to the library and the unique artworks to the collection. Okay, that answers my question perfectly. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
In this case, I think we are just perfect on time, slightly behind. And if there are any other questions, please take them to the afternoon panel. We have one comment here. which is, I think, more adequate for tonight's panel. The question relates to whether Fluxus there are young Fluxus artists, or whether that make new performance, or either just recreating the old ones. So thanks to all of us, and all of us who have an intriguing question, who have experience with those matters. But for the time being, let me just thank again Laura Montanari and Alessandro Gazzotti for this wonderful presentation.
Grazie, thank you.
Go into the lunch break, which will take us, I think for those of us who are here, we have this wonderful lunch buffet, as usual. I don't want to make anyone envious about this, but this is just a little something. And we'll reconvene here again at 2 o'clock, sharp 2 o'clock after the lunch break, here for the talk of Lionel Bavier about Eckhart archives.